My role really as a speaker, as an educator, is to create an experience where I don't change anybody's mind. I create an experience which expands the aperture, the view of what's possible, even in terms of own self-referentiality, like how someone thinks of themselves, their own concept of self, of leadership. And through that experience, people then will choose to change or they will not.
Welcome to SELINTalks, podcast by Selin Club. I'm Shruti Verma, your host and director of Selin Club. Today, we're thrilled to dive into a thought-provoking session with Louka Parry, a true pioneer at the forefront of educational transformation. As the CEO and the founder of The Learning Future, Louka has shaped dynamic educational landscapes around the globe, fostering environments where creativity and strategic innovation thrive. From his early days igniting change as a young principal to spearheading global initiatives that intertwine emotional learning with cutting-edge strategies, Louka's journey is nothing short of inspiring. Get ready to explore how education can evolve to meet future challenges and inspire a new generation of learners. He's not just shaping the future, he's designing it with every talk, workshop, and partnership. So if you're curious about how we can transform learning environments into empowering the next generation, stay tuned. This conversation promises profound insights and visionary ideas that could redefine education. Let's get started and unfold the possibilities. Let's welcome Louka. Welcome to SELINTalks, Louka. I'm so glad that you're here today. And it is the last episode of this season, and I'm glad it's with you. So thank you so much for being here. How are you feeling today?
Look, I'm feeling great. Actually, the end of my day here in Sydney. And yeah, what a delight to be the final episode of this season or this package. It's really great.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, we start off with something called icebreaker question, which is goofy, which is completely out of the box. So I love to use this, especially this segment. I love. So if you could teach one lesson from everything you've learned in life and work, but you could teach it in any classroom in the world, underwater, on a mountaintop, or even on the moon, where would you go and what would you teach?
That's so beautiful. I think the lesson is uniqueness, which is to say, in a world, and I think it comes from one of my favorite quotes, and I'll paraphrase it from Carl Jung, which is this idea that if you don't know who you are, then the world will tell you. And so there's this idea that actually the lesson is to not just explore kind of what the perceptions from outside yourself, but also understand your inner world, the internal development that then becomes the external development. So that's probably the lesson. Now, where would I do it? That's a really great question. And do you know where I'd do it? I would do it in an awe-inspiring location. And that's because I love the science of awe and what it does to us, which is it makes us realize how we are just this infinitesimally small part of this enormous cosmic universe. And yet somehow we are also irreducibly unique. And that paradox, I think, is it still blows my mind today,
It's beautiful. So, I don't know,
probably be floating in space, observing not just the Milky Way, but perhaps somehow all the galaxies and realizing, this is it. I've got this beautiful 80-year time span, 100 years maybe. What am I going to do with this life? And that being the kind of lesson to find our way forward from there.
That is beautiful. I would have never thought of it, but obviously very, very, very unique lesson that you're going to be teaching. And that is something, that's unique in its own way. I think this also comes in from, if you don't take decisions about yourself, about your life, others will do it. It's almost on the same line. Yeah. Wow. It's been a while since I thought about this.
Well, we can get so involved in our day-to-day life. And there's something powerful, especially as a futurist, about playing with the aperture of our life. Like we zoom in or we zoom out, and we should be zoomed in. We should pay attention to what's going on in our world and around us. But there's something powerful about zooming out intentionally to get a sense of, is this path that I'm trending on the path that really makes meaning for me in this life? And then you can put that in any context, in a career context, as an employee, as an entrepreneur, So I just find it really, really fascinating and quite philosophical, but I think quite practical as well, like, because the future self is there waiting for you. But of course, you're the person that determines who that future self will be, which is like the most wonderful thing there is about life, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's what I love so much about education, is that all education really is about that understanding of your irreducible uniqueness, and then how you cultivate those capabilities, the skill sets, the knowledge, with a mindset that I'm here to serve others. I'm here to do something with my life, to build things collaboratively. And this is what great schools do, of course. They create environments where every single learner, adult and child, can really step into that selfhood and can thrive through it.
Yeah, I think only if we consider the uniqueness of the kid and what kind of environments we're going to give to that kid, be it home actually, or be it school, be it a playground, I think a world will shift, and it's shifting. Of course, it's shifting. But if we collectively think about it, it's going to be something else.
I agree. I think there's multiple factors, Shruti, at the moment. There's there's a coming alive, as it's called. And I'm kind of quoting Jamie Wheal here, who's one of my favorite authors, and I think there's a coming alive. People are awakening. But at the same time, our ability to stay alive is also decreasing. And so there's this kind of this tension that we find of like the awakening of, well, what am I here to do? What's my agency as a change maker, as a human being, as someone endowed with the capacity to choose? And then how do I make good choices? How do we collectively make good choices to build a better society and a better world? One that thrives really, that cultivates life-giving energy, and a regenerative view of our planet, which is, of course, what our planet truly is, as much as we might try to ignore that fact to our peril.
I think that is going to be another episode if we talk about how, especially how we've been treating Earth altogether. Yeah. All right. I just wanted to ask you this because it's very fascinating. At the same time, I can actually relate. You became principal very soon in life, actually, quite young. And that's not a small feat. Do you think there was a part of you that you thought that this is at 27 or 28, I'm going to reach at this point? Or did it happen, of course, because of your actions, but did you ever imagine this?
It was never my intent. It was never my goal, Shruti, I think.
Is it?
It wasn't something I set out to, quote, achieve. What's so fascinating, I think, is like the paradox of choosing and surrendering simultaneously. What do we notice about our life, our context? And of course, this is what great philosophers, thinkers, leaders can do. They can notice the environment. And then you try to follow where you're being guided in some way at the same time. And so I was delighted to take on the really significant responsibility of being a very young principal. And, I chose it fully, and I gave it all that I had for the years that I was. But yeah, it wasn't kind of a thing on my list to achieve per se. And I think I've tried to live my life in that way, with an element of trust, but also an element of, how would I even call it? Voracious appetite for learning and for exploration. And, having traveled the world and continually learning languages and studying for more than a decade at universities and all this kind of stuff, I just find it, how do we live life as if we were to die tomorrow, but learn as if we were to live forever?
Wow.
Which, of course, is the wonderful Gandhian, Gandhiji quote, which is it's something that really has I've centered as a driving force in my life as a leader and as an educator, is that idea. Make the most of what we have today, but also don't stop being curious about this incredible creation that we're a part of. And that, of course, is where the magic of education comes in, because that's what a great teacher will do. Be they floating in the galaxy, be they on top of a mountain, or be they under a tree in a regional community somewhere in the subcontinent, or in a classroom here in Australia. That idea of like cultivating the essence, the curiosity that's part of humanity, I think is just a beautiful foundation that I feel so resonant with. That's why I feel like my place is very much in the learning ecosystem, wherever I happen to be next.
I love how you think, because it's very fresh perspective on things, because we end up talking about education in a very different manner. And then there is formal education, then there is what are we doing for our kids, and then what are we making them global citizens? Obviously, all of these things are in place. But I really, really admire how you think, because it's not just here. It's not just 2D dimension. If you understand what I mean, it's
Yes.
above it all. Yeah, I love that.
On the 2D, 3D thing, I really do. I've kind of learned this in my journey so far, now in my late 30s. It's our capacity to learn. This is the premise behind the company, The Learning Future. It's our capacity to learn that's the most important asset that we hold. Not any particular given knowledge at any point in time, the performance orientation, but the learning orientation, the mastery orientation or mindset. And so how do we learn across our lifespan, so lifelong, but also in life-wide ways? And then also in life deep ways. So in some ways, it's a 3-dimensional model. It's life, like learning is lifelong, life wide, and life deep. And if we're missing one of those 3 components, we're missing out on the gift that learning can give to us, be it to pull ourselves out of poverty, be it to create a good job for ourselves, be it to work in the public sector or the nonprofit sector, whatever the case is. The life wide aspect is, again, opening the aperture of our view for which learning actually matters. And yes, formal schooling, super important still, but of course has ignored kind of most of the other aspects that happen in non-formal and informal contexts around credentials. So that's expanding. But then the depth is really important too. We kind of sometimes teach too much surface breadth instead of going for depth. Teach less, better, cultivate curiosity, and then let learners use their agency to determine what matters to them. And because it's kind of part of being human, they'll keep asking questions. And that will drive their expansion throughout their life. That's my philosophy anyway, Shruti.
No, I love that. I love the analogy of it. As to, we don't actually think about it. If we know there are certain facts that we know that, hey, this is how learning happens on a psychological level. But if we were to explain this to a kid, that kid would also understand. That's the surprising part we do not consider. Like when we say I consider all of us even remotely involved in education sector. No matter what we're doing, if it is anything related to education sector, we have our part in making how our future is going to be. So I think, that's beautiful. And you're going to listen to this phrase a lot, because I think, whatever you're speaking is beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Did you ever think, oh, wait, before I ask this, were there any people who were telling you that, hey, you're too young to be a principal, or, you're too young to do this? Or did somebody dismiss your efforts or ideologies or learnings at any given point?
I think my realization was that the people who really were those I needed to pay attention to were the students. They were my real stakeholders. And yes, my line manager, my boss, and the system leaders and parents and others. But if young people are having a remarkable experience, or we've solved a problem for them, or we've created a possibility for them, then that should be a conversation that we should stand in and be courageous to say so. And there's this, I think, quite a tragic understanding sometimes that we sometimes sacrifice the potential of young people for the sake of harmony between adults. And that's why leadership ultimately is courageous. And, whatever dimension of leadership it is, it's saying, I believe this is what I believe in. And then being able to be criticized for it. I mean, it just so happens, Shruti, that I'm a very curious learner and curious man. And I didn't experience too much pushback from people saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I was the youngest person in the room, in a lot of rooms for a period of time. And that's remained the case for a while until now I'm kind of reaching kind of a mid-career stage, which is it's a lovely maturation in some ways. But yeah, I think what I've realized, and it's kind of back to that first primary lesson, the first principle lesson, which is the person that we should be most worried about is the inner critic, because they're the one most likely to derail our efforts. And we know this from researching people that are at the end of their lives. The thing they say, their number one regret of the dying, from Bronnie Ware's work, is, I wish I'd lived a life true to myself, not a life that another person expected of me. And so that is like the self-permission that we should try to live with all the time. And I, as a human, I still struggle with it. I still have like, oh, I can't do that because that's a fear and I'll be judged in this way. All of that is kind of the internal psychology of the inner world. So yeah, I think far more problematic and far more powerful is our own self-concept. And we see this with great entrepreneurs, great leaders. They stand for things. And the ones that we truly should follow are the ones that stand for a more positive, abundant version of the world that we live in. But that comes, often it comes from them being incredibly resilient, if not anti-fragile, in the way that they approach, the way they live their life.
Do you think humility has a role to play in all of this?
1,000%, Shruti. I'm really curious about paradox generally, right? So I think and I'm going to borrow from Professor Adam Grant here, and I love this phrase, confident humility. And the reason I like confident humility is because toxic humility is also a problem. Which is to say, oh, what would I know? And we see this a lot. And to speak directly, we see this a lot from women who have been ostracized because of the hyper-masculinized, not hyper-masculine, I'd say problematic corporate environments of the workforce. And so women are told to lean in but that's not the only thing that needs to happen. There needs to be a breakdown of some of the system conditions. So they're more favorable for everyone to be able to step in to their full piece. So yeah, I think that's the piece around humility is, we should be humble about what we don't know, and yet we should be confident in our humility. Which is to say, when I feel I have something to say, I should say it. We should speak up. And this is the kind of, again, the paradox between not being arrogant or susceptible to the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is where we think we're the expert.
Yeah.
And I read a blog one time, versus the expert who's very humble, but actually also asks the right questions at the right time and actually has such a deep expertise that can make really powerful decisions based on discernment.
Yeah. I think the most successful people, if you look at, leaving a few out of this equation, but the most successful people that we look at are actually extremely humble and curious at the same time. And the skill to be humble enough and then not being arrogant after being such an expert is actually commendable. Do you think you have that?
Oh, I think I work towards it, to be honest with you. But, I, as a keynote speaker and someone that delivers professional development for leaders, obviously I have to believe I have something to say. So there has to be a confidence there. But a lot of my work is around asking questions and pondering the potential solutions, the emerging practices. Unfortunately, and I'm going to paraphrase another thinker here, but it's one of the great problems with the world is that the ignorant are so cocksure and the intelligent so full of doubt. And that I think we just see all the time, right? We conflate confidence or certainty for accuracy all the time. Well, they said it like they believe, and one of the jokes I tell is, they know that 87% of people believe any statistic that you tell them.
Yeah.
87%.
Believe it, 87%.
And of course, I don't actually know what the statistic is, right? But I'm just making up that if you say it confidently enough, people are like, oh, that sounds about right. So yeah, there's something about this moment in education systems, but also in our society where discernment is becoming such a key skill. And if we can't discern between bias, between even intentionality, between hidden incentives, we end up in a world that I think is quite a dangerous world to live in for a whole range of reasons. And of course, we're seeing some of that play out in our world at the moment. So hence the foundational role of education and every teacher's role in helping young people, not just to know, but to know how to think well. And that intellectual stretch and intellectual curiosity. I mean, what a gift it is to give to young people.
That's true. You mentioned about what is happening in the world. I'm very curious about this because I want to gather other people's perspective. Do you think whatever is happening in this world, be it wars, conflicts, major conflicts, eradicating an entire species of nationalities altogether, do you think education can be as powerful as it should be, or is it powerful enough to actually influence this?
I'm pausing to give you an honest answer.
I know.
because
That's okay.
I have a belief, of course, that it must be. And that is still my belief, that it must be powerful enough to change the way someone, and at the level of belief, at the level of true mindset, how do we let go of an old mental model to enable a new one to come through? How do we let go of an extractive mindset so that we can enter a regenerative one? Let go of kind of the zero-sum competitor, constantly violence, and enter abundant. Those are really important questions that education can ask. But I actually think there's a broader context for it, Shruti, and the model that I use in our work is called the 3 E's. And they are economics, ecology, and education. And my sense is that that's actually a Venn diagram. And so
it is
understanding the impact of all 3 of those E's into the middle of that Venn diagram is really important when we think about how we design a system, be that a social system, be that an economic system. Because we can do everything we like in education, but unless the incentives of economic models also change, we won't be nearly as powerful. Similarly, if we don't shift our ecological behaviors, then that will also doom us in some ways, because we think we're separate from nature in some bizarre, mistake, rather than part of nature and therefore completely nested within interdependent ecosystems. And so I think about those 3 constructs and how they interplay. And so I've started to learn quite a lot about ecology and quite a lot about economics, and come to the view that we need to evolve all 3 of those approaches together.
Yeah.
How we treat our planet, how we treat our markets, and how we treat our people. And if we develop our people, and if we do that, that's when I think we can have some really significant system change, as I think we see in pockets of the world. Of course, how might we even reach the 107 targets of the 17 SDGs? And those are all, we're going to have to do it through asking ourselves different questions and changing incentives behind particular models that operate.
That's actually brilliantly put. Yeah. Love the Venn diagram as well.
Thanks.
Moving to your entrepreneurial journey, what were your thoughts behind it? What made you start the Learning Future?
Honestly, it kind of is back to, I guess I'm just on repeat here with the resonance of,
that's okay,
of uniqueness, Shruti. It's like, what's my thing to do? And I'd worked in a public system as a teacher, a principal, and a policymaker. I'd worked for a training and consulting company for a period of time as well, where I learned a lot about design thinking and innovation and traveled extensively. And so then I thought, well, what better way to kind of work out what's mine to do than create my own vehicle for my own curiosity and contribution? And so that's what the Learning Future initially began as. It began as in 2019. I spent 12 months traveling the world, visiting a whole range of different institutions. It was effectively kind of like an MEd, MBA, like micro PhD, I guess. What am I interested in? And the concepts of social emotional learning, well-being science, of innovation and system change, the learning sciences, leadership, ecology, these are the things that really emerged for me. I thought, oh, well, how could I contribute? And I thought, well, I'll just start an organization that tries to focus on taking schools on this journey towards the future, and especially leaders to lead the future. And so really for the past 5 years, I've been paying attention to futures literacies and foresight and signals. And I guess the operating thesis we hold is that if we can support the capabilities of leaders to think like futurists, that enables them to step beyond constraining mental models that hold us in stasis, hold us in the past. Now, I'm a big fan of history. I love it. I've studied it. I continue to study it. But of course, the point of history is to teach us to direct us where we should go forward. And so, a history of the future is a good way to think about it. And then how do you come back from the scenario or the world building of what you desire, be it as a company, as an organization, a school, be it as an individual? What would the 65-year-old Shruti say to you right now? What would the 65-year-old Louka say to me? Like, that's a great question to ask.
Yeah.
Because it implicates a whole suite of different ways of thinking about your agency right now as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a learner. And the same for me, same for anybody. And so all these are kind of tools, and I think that's what we've put together at the Learning Future. And it began with me as a thought leader, and now we have a wonderful team of educators that do this work around, be it school strategy and supporting schools to face the future, working with the senior leadership team and co-designing with the board and even with the entire student population and professional staff population sometimes, be it that work or looking at the future of a school campus and the environment, or professional learning. Well, how do we all continually develop? And in ways that aren't just in the improvement paradigm, but are kind of more oriented towards the transformation paradigm. How do we take everything we are, pull it apart as a school, and then put it back together in a way where it's different in kind, not just in scale or anything else. So that's been a bit of the journey, Shruti, and who knows where we're going. We have a direction, a strategy, but, and that is around leadership and thriving.
Yeah.
But we'll just keep paying attention and sense making, or sensing from the field, as we call it sometimes in system speak.
Yeah. It sounds like a beautiful journey, as well as a lot of different things that you might have figured out in your travels and things like that must be an experience altogether. Because according to me, what I've realized is that if you really want to look at life from a different perspective, just go around and travel. And not like, of course you can do fancy travels if you want to, but really go to places, learn about people and their cultures and everything. I'm sure you must have done the same to able to grasp as to what is actually happening.
Yeah, that's absolutely been my approach. Funnily enough, since I kind of turned 18, I've done that for 20 years. And be it learning languages as well has been an incredible vehicle for me too, Shruti. As a monolingual speaker until I was 18, and then deciding to go to university to learn to be a languages teacher with Spanish and modern Greek as double majors, and drama and physical education, and in English, teaching English to speakers of other languages diploma as well. So yeah, that was kind of where it all began. But I agree. I mean, let one's curiosity drive you. That is just such a great way to be able to live. It's a privilege to live that way too, and I fully acknowledge that. And certainly I think seeking out challenge, seeking out new ways of being, new contexts, new worldviews, all those things are only possible because I have changed where I used to be. And I've disrupted myself over and over again. And, traveling across all the world. And again, the universal piece, though, is again, like, what are the principles that underpin education systems or a good society? And they are universal capabilities and contracts we make with each other in how we choose to behave, as beautifully diverse as the world is linguistically and culturally and ethnically. And of course, that we should celebrate and maintain and expand upon.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, it's not just celebrating diversity and inclusion. And I think this is a really interesting point, especially with the US election and where this was a flashpoint, right? DEI was a controversial topic during the election. I think what breaks down my analysis of this is that embracing diversity can feel threatening to some people.
Yeah.
And so there is a stage beyond the embracing of diversity inclusion, and it's to embrace our common unity, our community, literally, like the word, our common humanity. And there's something like where we get stuck, if we get stuck at that simple layer, we see each other as different irreconcilably rather than understanding we're actually more the same than we are different. And because of that fact, we should celebrate the difference that we have. And so it's just a real framing exercise that I'm curious to see how that continues to play out across the world now. Yeah, that's a long answer to your question. But I think that's kind of, these are ideas that I really kind of think about in terms of what continues to inspire me in the way I show up.
That's good. That's actually very good. It's not just one. Like I also have an ideology wherein, you're not just yourself. You're made of experiences, other people's habits, things that you've done in life, or be it how you make your coffee can depend on a friend in your high school, how that person used to make coffee and things like that. So it's very, very important for us to open up. Like you said, it's beyond inclusion and accepting diversity, is actually accepting that at the level, the smallest level of us, exists, the atom level of us is actually the same.
Absolutely.
Love that.
We're all made of stars. It's just the remarkable fact of physics. that we are all stardust. Isn't that incredible? And,
I love
matter
that.
never disappears. It's just transformed, and this is why the quantum physicists are having such a great time at the moment. We're all so interested in what they're saying.
Yeah.
Because wow, we're all actually part of the same thing, and maybe even it's all happening at the same time, and our consciousness, impacts matter. These are just really fascinating discussions. But of course, sometimes we just get stuck in the us-them dichotomy, which is false. It's just us. It's a unity awareness. But of course, that's easy to say. But when when emotions are elevated and the future of our planet is on the line, sometimes the tribalism reemerges and it becomes us-them, win-lose dichotomies instead of how do we Socratically talk about this, and rather than debate, engage in dialogue. Because the problem with debates is they don't usually change people's minds. They just
it's
solidify, I'm going to
situation,
debate you. What? Instead of let's enter dialogue. Because one of the first questions I ask in some of my talks and some of our work is, two questions. One, when did you last change your mind in a significant way?
Oh, wow. I like that.
And then a second question I ask is, are you willing to change your mind through this work? Because if the answer to the first one is, I have no idea, and the answer to the second one is, no, not really, the person doesn't need to be in the room anymore. My role really as a speaker, as an educator, is to create an experience where I don't change anybody's mind. I create an experience which expands the aperture, the view of what's possible, even in terms of own self-referentiality, like how someone thinks of themselves, their own concept of self, of leadership. And through that experience, people then will choose to change or they will not. And that's kind of the key piece to this. And I even I get pretty nerdy and I show a video of, synaptogenesis, which is the growth of synapses. Yeah. Because that's my goal. My goal, just like every teacher's goal, is to change the brains of the human beings around them, in front of them, beside them, in fact, their own brain, and not to calcify in a particular way of being and knowing, but to stay supple like life, like bamboo that can move with the wind, not brittle. And life is the best metaphor that we have, I think, for us in education and for us as human beings, is we are living beings, and a school is a living system. Therefore, it's not an institutional system. We might think of it as a machine. It's not a machine at all. It's actually a living ecosystem. And so that view can change the way that we behave and even some of the priorities that we have when we think of our schools as living systems themselves that regenerate. And if we've got too much things at maturity and too many things that are calcified, we need to burn them down, and regenerate them, put some seeds in, water them, and they'll grow back into a beautiful plant that will bear harvest. But a lot of us in education, and it's not our fault, it's just our responsibility. We've just inherited so many mental models that are well past maturity. They're rotting on the vine, and we need to compost them.
It's almost toxic now.
Possibly, yeah, exactly. You eat that fruit, it's actually going to do some damage sometimes. And that's not just for the learners themselves, it's also for the teachers that sometimes feel completely disempowered. And so this is the great challenge for all of us in whatever role we play.
I wanted to ask you about the learning future. How does it function? Like, for example, of course, you're working with the schools, the educators, the leaders, the thought leaders.
Yeah.
How does it work for let's assume there's somebody who's watching this and is interested to work with the learning future and owns a school. How does that work?
It's great. Well, we do 4 things, ultimately. The first is we support school strategy. The second is we deliver professional learning. Third is we deliver keynotes and what we call content weaving, like an MC role, but actually with specialist knowledge. And the fourth is we do kind of system consulting work. And so if you're from a school and you're listening to this, our role is to really support you to turn your organization so it faces the future. And we do a thing called future ready strategy. And it's kind of a multi-stage approach using our methodology to help take you into a reimagination, into discovery, to take you into redesign, and then ultimately into delivery and to an evolution. And that's a cycle that I think every organization needs to go through. And so that's our work with strategy. And my colleague, Dr. Ann Nock, runs that work as our head of strategy and culture and director of learning environment design. And then the professional learning piece, similarly, we know that the best way to change people's behavior and minds is to work with them over time. And so I've done so many keynotes in my life. I love that role. I love being the provocateur, and I'll continue to play that role and trying to kind of make it a powerful initiating event. But of course, how that translates over time is what I'm really interested in from an impact perspective. And so, you know, running some of our leadership work, be it Lead with Intention, which is specific for the early years, be it our Learning Future Fellowship, which is really about, you know, emerging middle leaders in particular.
Okay.
Or be it using our Learning Future Intelligence model, which is for executive principals at a cohort level. You know, those are different ways that we try to engage alongside systems, sectors, schools to play our role. And we can't do everything. We're really just trying to
Yeah. So is it highly curated? Because obviously if you're working with strategies, every schools, every institution that you come across might have different set of, let's say, gaps or issues or something that they would want to develop for being future ready and things like that. So it's highly curated.
Absolutely. The methodology, you know, it's a loose, tight framing here, Shruti, to get nerdy with you, right? We're very tight on process, but we're very loose in terms of content and context. And that is the way education should work. So our methodology works, we know that. But it's, of course, you're in a different context. If you're in Singapore or if you're in, you know, Islamabad or in Sydney, you know, or anywhere across this beautiful region of ours in Shanghai, there's going to be different contexts. And so we'll use the same process. And, you know, we've done this work now with well over 20 schools, the strategy work. And, you know, our professional development now, I haven't looked at our impact numbers, but we work with about 10,000 educators per year through all the different touch points that we work through. And, you know, we've just started to work in the UK and some work in the US as well. So I'm trying to keep it all under wraps for a little while. But, you know, we really do love the work that we do. And so, yeah, for a school leader, they have a very specific job to do. And the job to be done is to be a strategic leader for that organization. So we walk alongside them, their board, their senior leadership team, and use a co-design process to come up with an articulation for the direction that school wants. And then we can help support the implementation through a middle leadership program or whatever's needed. So that's kind of how that process works. But often we also love the cohort approach, which is you get a group of schools together. And we can take group of schools through the methodology where they're all working in leadership teams as well. So that's another way to make it, and use economy of scale as well to make it work.
I love that. I really like the approach because of course there are different things that you're focusing on, and then it's actually the top-down approach that has proven to work in the school systems or institution system, because the management level is where we actually bring a mindset change and things like that. Love that. Absolutely love that. So whosoever is watching this or going to be watching this, keep a note.
Yeah, and I mean, there's more information on our website, the Learning Future.
I know, I saw that. I just wanted to kind of, have like a brief preview of what you do, what you guys do. I love the website as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so you have very deep commitment towards social emotional learning. How do you see SEL transforming education strategies globally?
Shruti, it's pretty simple. It needs to be mandatory at the center of every education system, right alongside cognitive development or academics. That just needs to happen today, if possible. And so because we know, and increasingly you can even just go into the future of workspace and look at industry and what they're asking for. And increasingly they are the social and the emotional skills. There are things like self-regulation, collaborative problem solving. These are communication. These are all ethical decision making. They're all social and emotional skills, but you need academics alongside. So it's not an either or. For me, it's having social and emotional and academic learning as, again, another Venn diagram. And I like to add physical and spiritual learning into that Venn diagram. You have then a multidimensional, fully human education model. And the fully bit is important because it's the whole being, the whole person. And if you do that, then we're setting up our young people with every possible chance they have to make good decisions in their lives. So the social emotional learning work, I first came across through a fellowship at Salzburg Global Seminar, and it just completely just transformed the way that I saw education system work. And we have a nonprofit called Karanga, the Global Alliance for Social Emotional Learning and Life Skills, and we convene a group of SEL champions from education systems globally.
Oh, wow.
On our steering committee and on the executive committee of which I sit. And, we host events all over the place. In New York recently for the United Nations. There we had some of our partners doing this work. It's so important. It's so important. And we forget about it because one of the mature mental models we have is that schools are about academic achievement. Now, I disagree with that. I don't think they are. I think that's a narrow view of education. Education is about social, emotional, academic, physical, spiritual development. It's a whole person development. That's my philosophy of what a school should be, not even could be, but should be. And so that's how I see it transforming education systems globally. And thankfully, we have 30 years of research around the impact of social emotional learning. We have Nobel laureates talking about how important it is to invest it, especially in the early years. And we have some wonderful nonprofits doing really, and I would say education systems doing some really wonderful work at embedding this, even there in India.
Yeah.
Where you currently are, be it in Delhi, thinking of the happiness curriculum there, brought out to 1.1 million students in Delhi schools, and my colleagues from Dream a Dream, Vishal, Talreja, they're just doing some wonderful work all over the world. Mexico, national approach for social emotional learning. They did it so well, they put it onto televisions as well because it was such a priority. And so that how can the whole country access this kind of learning? There are just some really wonderful case studies of what's possible. And the more we can embed this at the beginning of the process and keep our focus on it the entire time, the better it is for our societies. Because what we want are young people leaving school with, yes, academic knowledge, of course, right? But also a capability to self-regulate, to demonstrate emotional intelligence, a capability to understand social awareness, to act respectfully between genders, and to make good decisions across their lives, especially including for the planet. So that to me feels like that is where we're moving. And at the UN in 2022, we had the Transforming Education Summit, TES, which opened the United Nations General Assembly. And that was really about this agenda as well. It's not just improving the old model, Shruti, that's not going to get us there.
It's not.
We need to transform it. But of course, how do you do that? Systematically, day by day, week by week, over time. And yes, top down for the enabling, liberating factors, but definitely also bottom up, where agency is being felt, experienced, and activated in the educators, in the learners themselves. If you get that, we might even meet in the middle, which would be lovely.
It will be a very nice, correlation towards both the things. I have a question very completely out of the context. Sure. I have heard a lot of parents, especially actually everywhere. I've heard very close relatives, very close friends, and even I've heard people who have just not in the region, just stories. Their parents are opting for homeschooling for one major reason, that they do not want their kid to be traumatized. What thoughts do you have on it?
Wow, what a big question, Shruti. I've heard this too, that homeschooling is one of the most rapidly expanding movements that we see. And I guess my question to anyone listening is like, who was traumatized by their schooling experience? And I think most of us would say in some way there were elements that actually were quite harmful. I mean, and I'm sure many elements that were actually really positive and powerful, but the schools just weren't designed for this current moment. They were designed for a past era of basically mass acculturation to develop a working people for the Industrial Revolution. And, it came out of a whole suite of different thinking around the Prussian army and the militaristic mindset. The reason we have schools that are called Block A, Block B, Block C, because it's linked to effectively the way prisons are built. Same industrialized, mechanistic model. And we need to reject that. But not just reject it and not go anywhere, reject it and embrace a regenerative, liberating understanding of what schooling should be. And so I empathize with parents that say, I don't want my child to be a student at this school. But I also empathize with the educators that are working incredibly hard to do the best they can within the constraints of the system. And so this is why the only way we can move is to move towards liberation of all of us. Let's reject the things that are not just unhelpful, but potentially anti-human. And let me be a bit controversial. Why on earth would we do closed book examinations in any context is beyond me at this point in time. They don't occur in any other part of society or the workforce. What we call cheating in schools, we kind of call being resourceful in the workplace, if not being a great entrepreneur. And so it's like this disconnect is continuing to widen. And I'm curious to see what scenario will play out here. Will education systems get to a point, and AI will probably be the technology that breaks this, because it's broken a lot of assessment devices, and task design now needs to be completely reimagined, which is, I think, is a good thing. But of course, we need to support educators to take that journey. Like, will that be the one that kind of really disrupts this standardized one-size-fits-all model for a fully personalized journey and even a personal journey of education for every single learner? Time will tell, Shruti, but there are tangible things that learning organizations can do. And the first thing they can do is start to move away from those mechanistic, standardized, anti-human things that we do because we think we have to. Move towards new, dynamic, abundant ways of learning, being, and doing that are based on learning sciences, by the way. It's not let's throw anything out. Let's embrace what we are at the cutting edge. Let's put that into the system. Why do we do 8 lessons a day, Shruti? Is that a good timetable for any human being? No. Show me the learning science that says 8 40-minute lessons is the best way to learn something. Right. So I guess there's my provocation, and that's just one example. Let's look at the structure and organization of schools. Let's look at the material environments. Let's look at the organizational culture, the way teachers teach and work together, which, by the way, should always be in teams, not as a sole human responsible for 30 young people. That's a bit of a difficult.
That's a big responsibility.
And then what's the student experience that ultimately we want to design? And we design that with young people, not for them. And we certainly don't do it to them. The preposition matters. They always do, because they determine the relationship between us and our learners. And that's a huge amount of work that's happening in our world, with some really good things, but more to be done.
Thank you for sharing this vision of yours and opinion, because it can go either way. This is a question, because I was actually pondering on this for a while, because I was seeing this, and then when you think about your past school experiences, of course there were great things. I am who I am because of multiple schools that I've studied in, and teachers who have supported me, and principals who were kind to me. But then at the same time, there were people who were not, or did not realize certain things about me. And to give them the responsibility to realize is also not fair, right? Because at our time, like the schools were not built for learning disabilities. They were not built for inclusion. They were, like you said, it was mass production of information and informed kids. Yeah, but thank you for sharing your opinion. I've been thinking about it for a while now.
Yeah, well, me too. And again, we'll just see how technology impacts this. And I think if you and I sitting down having this conversation in 2035, I think I would put some money on it. Not that but to say that there's going to be, just like we're seeing finance being transformed through Web 3.0, the internet itself changing, AI shifting realities, ecology shifting. It's going to be very interesting to see where schools sit and how much of our learning is augmented, and how many of us have a personalized learning tutor. And there's the good things about AI, and of course there's all the downsides too around ethics, data sovereignty, and the existential risk that it might also pose too.
Yeah. So you mentioned AI and we talked about it. How do you envision balancing technological advancement with essential human skills a person can champion or in a classroom?
I think what we might see is more discernment about the role of technology. When laptops came into schools, and I talked to my colleagues, and Anne in particular, she's been in education for 40 years, and so she remembers, and
of course,
when the first thing was, brought in. And the challenge is we've just kind of substituted them. They haven't truly redefined a lot of the learning that we do. How I see this playing out is that AI used strategically can do a lot for equity, certainly do a lot for the learner experience, and also potentially for the teacher role and teacher workforce. I see that those are kind of happening now, of course. But AI should be used for the technical aspect. Like, using AI is a technical skill. Education is broader than a technical view. It's a social, emotional. view or psychosocial view. So what I see is, schools may become bastions for human connection, which is I go to school to connect with human beings. And we saw this during COVID across all over the world. Young people, what they miss the most, their human connection.
Yeah.
Hugging their friend and putting him a high five, And so I think there's something about fully human education is where not just where we need to go, but it's also the emerging value proposition for a school. And even for the homeschoolers, it can be the value proposition for them. Well, if you go to a safe environment where healing and psychological safety, but also intellectual stretch, challenge, and grappling are all there, that's a place to send your beloved child. But if we're missing some of those components and it's too much about assessing performance of young people and pitting them against each other and ranking them, well, I can fully understand why there'll be hesitations, because that model shouldn't hold anymore. We can do better than.
Actually, this was my dialogue when I was shocked to know that the very close relative was thinking about homeschooling. So obviously the dialogue opened and she asked, what do you think? I said, I think above all, first of all, you look at the school that you're choosing. Don't, even if you have the slightest of doubts that this is a little bit backward, go ahead and cancel it, like out from your list. And secondly, I think for human connection, just that would be like a big takeaway. Of course, you look at the surroundings and everything, but for a child to learn if their friend is sad or happy or celebrating their birthdays, high-fiving them, going to trips together, school trips together, things like that, you can't do that in homeschooling.
Yeah.
So that was my dialogue. I won't say argument, but that was my dialogue. But obviously the parent knows better, and then ultimately it's their decision. But that is something that even I was thinking.
I think it's an interesting one, because sometimes, and I'm going to be controversial here again, Shruti, it's my role. Sometimes parents don't know better. What they know is that they love their children incredibly. And so there's something about, and I'm realizing this even now looking at the work of the anxious generation from Professor Jonathan Haidt. If parents knew better, they wouldn't have allowed their young people to have screen time or use technology the way that they have, right? But we didn't know better. And so the point is, like, how do we all go on our own learning journey to know, like, this is the best environment, and it's not a perfect environment, This is a good enough environment, and the good enough parent is a good thing to shoot for, and I've heard that framing before. No one is a perfect parent. Be good enough. And so that just means, all right, well, how curious might I be? How about like brain development, about creating protective factors for our young people? And certainly the idea of school, schools as living systems means that it's all interconnected. And that's the reality of our planet and our universe. It's all interconnected. And so we can isolate ourselves, but ultimately it's how do we learn our way forward together?
Collectively,
together, really. And that's kind of selling, the whole idea of a network is precisely that orientation, it's kind of like the premise of your work. It's like, how do we learn our way forward together? Because, and that means being good learners, not just good knowers. Because the minute, we start to, well, I know for sure. No, do we? Let's consider that. Let's be curious always. So,
I think a lot of us have stopped being curious because we've been, I don't know, experiences or I don't know. I've seen a lot of people being less curious, and it puts me on a spot where, why is this person asking so many questions? And I'm just like, why are you not asking questions?
What's your theory? Why is that? Why is curiosity under threat?
A lot of people think that they know too much or they know enough. Enough. Yeah, I think enough is the key term here. And I think, I don't know, it's just weird if you think about it, because it doesn't set right in my head, not being curious. It just does not sit right in my head. If something is happening and you want to know what is happening, how are you unbothered? I mean, at a human level, we are here. We have evolved so much because we were curious.
Yeah.
Circular thing is rolling down a hill is curiosity to know wheels might work, or an elephant does not sink in the sand is curiosity. Why? And then we talked about pressure and area and all of those things. These are nerdy terms, but when you look at it, it was always there. it has come into education because somebody asked that question.
It's so beautifully put. Curiosity underpins everything. And I think there's, especially if as we move towards mastery, you can't master any content unless you're curious about it. It's a precondition, necessary precondition. And so one of the things we must do is protect childhood and cultivate curiosity. And what's interesting is it might even be protect curiosity as well. Because our young people are like our littlest learners are the most curious things we ever have. They're like, why is this happening? And why is that? And, it infuriates people eventually. But yeah, then you kind of, especially if you have a system that is designed for convergent thinking and, a single answer as opposed to the number of questions we might ask that might cascade from that answer. It's problem finding, not just problem solving. It's this kind of idea that I've learned through my kind of fellowships and way. So I think I'm really curious about it. I also think knowing how the brain works is important because we're in a moment where we are all under attack by incentives driving particular technology platforms to have us pay attention and effectively be consumers, not creators. As much as we talk about content creation, it's actually in their benefit to have clicks. And so eventually, if we're not careful, we might just be fed an algorithmic design that we all nod at. Yep. And so there's no, whatever provoked, we're never kind of sitting there listening to another view. And then you add to that heuristics, which are the shortcuts of the brain to think, to save energy, right, which is a survival mechanism for the brain. And there is something about even people that are experiencing additional stress in their lives, be it financial or social or environmental, they are less equipped to do the slow thinking because they have less resources cognitively. And so good thinking is also sometimes, it's also a privilege, which I think must be acknowledged. And so this is why the solution for education isn't just teach everybody. It's to shift the economic realities for communities as well, self-sovereignty. And then, of course, to make sure the environments that support us are conducive to that too. So that's what I'm curious about, Shruti, is that kind of how are we being programmed? How are we being like behaviorally designed through dopamine loops to behave in particular ways?
Yeah, I think the curiosity to know about how my brain works led me to therapy, for which I'm forever grateful.
Yeah.
There are so many things that I got through because I was very confused kid. Okay. I was extremely confused. I don't know why am I not like other kids? That was the major question in my life till I was 18. Although I was not a kid, almost adult, but that was a question that lingered so much and it used to affect. And I can only imagine there are thousands of millions of other kids who think, why are they different? And some of them, I had the privilege to go into therapy to be able to understand. Some of them don't even have that. And this is sad.
Yeah. I like a quote from Alain who says, because you live in the world, you probably need therapy. And I agree. Every human being needs someone. Needs a safe space to speak with somebody. Yeah, it's powerful. That's a great call out.
All right. Last but not the least, I love having this conversation. But last but not the least, what is next for you and the learning future? Any exciting projects in the pipeline? And what is one advice that you would like educators and education system policymakers, all of these people to hear from you?
So to answer them in order, one, what's next for Louka Parry? I think it's to kind of to hone in on a few specific things. I've been very much like enormous consumer research, trying to understand everything. Now I feel like I kind of have a bit of a view to build some processes. I have a book that I'm writing, for example. I think it's part of that journey, of everything I've learned over my career so far. So that's exciting to put that together. And the learning future, we've just got such a wonderful small team. And we've got some incredible consulting advisors all around the globe that are doing great work as well that we collaborate with. So the learning future, we're very excited about some of our new leadership programs that we've built based off all the learning and the research that we've done, especially the Learning Future Fellowship or Lead with Intention. These are really good leadership programs. And the key is always, would you want to be in the program yourself? Absolutely. I'd love to, that's always a good way to think about it. So that's kind of what's happening for us. And increasingly doing some work across more global work. But again, trying to make sure that we nail what we do already before we get too excited with expansion into new parts of the world. But yeah, would love to talk to anyone that kind of thinks about that. And then the final question, what's the piece of advice? I really feel like it's to come back to what we began with. It's to really sit with, if you could write a letter to your future self, committing something about your work, your life, your leadership, your teaching, what would that letter say? Because what that letter implies and infers are things like your uniqueness, what you're here to do most, the value that you add, that you matter. And of course, what's so wonderful about all of that is that we do matter and we can make a difference. And yet we're also just such a tiny piece of the puzzle of our planet. And so the paradox of having power to make an impact and also knowing that at the end of the day, we're all in it together and we can forgive ourselves when we get it wrong. And that's a really good piece of advice that I use myself, is to forgive myself every night and then recommit every single morning and remind myself that it's a gift to be alive and to do things in this world.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's absolutely beautiful. I don't have a better term for it because I love the word beautiful. So it's absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I had a blast. I'm telling you this because every time you were saying something, I was like, wow, there is another person who thinks on the same line. And it's crazy that you and I have met through this, intersection of education. I'm so grateful for this.
Thank you so much, Shruti. And thank you for what you do and the community that you've helped bring together. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That wraps up a truly enlightening conversation with Louka here at SELINTalks. Louka's insights remind us all about transformative power of education and endless possibilities when we approach learning with creativity and foresight. Thank you so much, Louka, for sharing your visionary ideas and for all the impactful work you're doing around the globe. And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us. Keep exploring, keep innovating, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in education. Until next time, keep learning and keep leading the change.